This is the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist and an empowerment mentor for women. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute, nor is it to convey professional, psychological, financial, or medical advice. If you could use such services, please seek them out from someone you trust. Now here is today's episode. Episode 130. And before I dive into today's episode, I want to let you know that I have a brand new online workshop available for you to watch, absolutely free. It's called The 3 Ways Being a Good Girl Holds You Back in Business or Your Career, and What to Do Instead. This workshop is for you if you worry about what other people may think if you speak up in a meeting, or maybe if you decide to raise your rates in your business. This is also for you if you say yes when you really mean no. Or maybe you really struggle with thinking there is something wrong with you because every other woman that you know seems to just have her stuff together and it gets her to-do list done. But there must be something wrong with you because you just can't seem to get your to-do list done without feeling overwhelmed and stressed out. I invite you to head over to NicoleBurgessCoaching.com/goodgirlways. It's all one word, to check out the new workshop. All right, here is today's episode. Well, welcome, sisters. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics that I have discussions with my clients often, and it's being able to discern between intuition and fear. I know many of my clients that if they're in that healthcare or the healing profession, they often are really intuitive with their clients, and their clients reflect that back. I know for many of my clients, they have often over the years reflected back how perceptive or intuitive I was with them. And I think that's beautiful, but it's also me honing in on that practice. What can happen is we're all born intuitive, but what can happen over the years as a child, as we're growing up, adult messages, cultural messages, stories, beliefs, they can really drown that out. It's not something that, at least here in our country, in the US, it's like really embraced unless you're growing up in a very kind of spiritual environment. And there are other countries and cultures who really do embrace that and follow it and believe in it. So I think if you have struggled sometimes with intuition or doubting that, what I call that small little voice or that deep inner knowing, we're gonna talk a little bit about how you can keep tapping into that so you can trust it more and more. So I think when we tap into that intuition, especially if we're running our own company, we're leading others, it can be such a beautiful gift and tool to help what we do in life. Okay, so let me back up a second here. For many of you, you know that I'm a Myers Briggs Type Indicator practitioner, right? And with Myers Briggs, they talk about on that second letter in the 4-letter kind of preference when you get typed is either sensing or intuition. And that means how do you take in information? So if you have the preference of intuition, it means you get an N in that type indicator. And what that means is people who prefer intuition like to take in information by seeing the big picture, focusing on the relationships and connections between the facts. They look for patterns and are especially attuned to seeing new possibilities. I know this is very true for me, and it's often reflected back how I see the big picture. So you're oriented to future possibilities, you're imaginative and verbally creative, focus on patterns in the meetings on data. You remember specifics when they relate to a pattern. You move quickly to conclusions and you follow hunches. You want to clarify ideas and theories before putting them into practice, and you really trust inspiration. So that's what it sounds like through the Myers Briggs Type Indicator for that second letter. If you have the intuition preference, it's how are you taking in information? You also have to really discern, is it something that you're wanting to see a pattern in, which would be more fear, right? Versus, nope, things really flow. All right, so let me back up just a little bit more. There are tons of different books out there that talk about intuition. I know way back when I was still an accountant, I had some friends, we would get together and we actually read a book. It's called Intuitive Living, A Sacred Path by Alan Seal. And we talked about the concepts that were in the book, which there's, tapping into your different energy centers, your chakra centers, and being able to clear those and live more intuitive versus like, oh, I have to have hard, cold facts before I can do anything type of thing. Penny Pierce, and she was a previous guest on episode 104. She started out part of her when she switched from, leading other people, she really was leading more about being more intuitive as well. So she's written a book on that. And again, her books are so full of information and research and ways to be. It's kind of heavy, but at the same time, just great stuff. She's another person who has written things on intuition. I know years ago, again, I read Shakita Guan, which she's not as like out in the forefront these days, on awakening, and that's part of it. There's just so many incredible people who teach about intuition, and you're all capable of it. So let me talk about what that means to be intuitive. Intuition is a process of really tapping into your own deep, well within you, your own inner wisdom. It's a place that inside of you, I like to say, you are fully connected to source, to the universe, to the divine, for me, to God, right? That's intuition. Like, call it the vertical channeling versus the horizontal channeling, which is of this earth, of this plane. And that's fear usually driven. That's like, it's got to be very linear. That's not the vertical channeling I'm talking about. You just kind of, you get this information, and that's the intuition. You may get a vision. You may hear a small voice inside of you. You may smell something. A color may emerge. There's various ways people receive intuitive hits and intuition. They also talk about, again, some of these books and things that I have read and people I follow, but intuition is also part of the energy center or the crown chakra, right? It's the top of your head. And when that is clear and open, you're open to receiving those intuitive hits. You're open to receiving those images and being able to see other people's auras and all kinds of other beautiful things. Now, let's talk about, how do you really discern? Is it intuition that you are hearing or receiving, but yet there's this fear that likes to bubble up that's stopping you from really acknowledging it or paying attention with it or following through with it? So when you're in your, what I call like the soul work, that spiritual practice work, when you're being mindful, when you're practicing your meditations, moving meditation, sitting meditation, that is helping you get out of your body and tapping into more of all the universe, right? That right there is helping you hone in and be open to more of your intuition. Fear is all about that future stuff, like the worry, right? Or it's stuck in that. Sometimes, again, I know more depression is like stuck in the past, but fear can also bring up past negative things that have happened, hard, challenging events. And it's just like, well, maybe that's going to happen again. And it's like, well, we don't know that because, again, those future moments haven't unfolded. Instead of seeing possibilities, fear is like looking for the worst case scenario, right? That catastrophizing piece of it. When you're in the intuitive state, when you're really open to listening to that, your body is feeling free. You're with ease. There's no constriction or tightness. When you're in a place of fear, that's where there's constriction. That's where there is tightness in your body. Like I said earlier, intuition is in the moment. Fear is when it's in the past or the future stuff. Intuition, you're responsive to what is going on. Fear is you're reacting to what is going on. Intuition can feel very light and open, and it's clear. There's no drama basically to it. Whereas fear can be plagued with like this dark and, oh my gosh, we've got to fight it. And it likes to create all these stories about what it is or what it isn't. Intuition, again, is you're able to discern, versus fear is you can get caught up into whatever that story is, paying attention to all those thoughts versus what you're feeling and seeing from the inside. Intuition feels exciting, maybe peaceful. You just feel kind of warm. And fear, again, can feel heavy, constrictive, sometimes even painful. I want to encourage you to think back. This is your action step. I want you to think back of a time or times, maybe when you were much younger, and you got this inner hunch about something. You had a story or a vision about someone or something, and you followed it. And when you followed it, it was like, wow, it ended up being this beautiful thing. Or that person said, how did you know? I so was hoping to hear from you and they hadn't reached out to you. Think back of a time when you really gave yourself permission to receive the information that came to you in an instant. That whether it's like you heard something, you saw something, you felt something, and you followed through with it. Now, I want you to fast forward a little bit as this adult woman that you are. Have there been other times where your choices that you made, you were open to receiving and hearing those intuitive hits that actually guided the choices you made? Where it's just like, wow, that was just easy. And so I do that over here in this part of my life, but I really block it when it comes to my professional life, or I block it when it comes to my relationships, or I block it when it comes to my money. Get curious. You're not judging. Get curious of times where you followed that intuition, you received the intuition, and other times when you're thinking back, you're like, oh yeah, that was truly fear-based because somebody would have made fun of me if I would have said X, Y, and Z. I'll give you an example. When I was back in grad school, I know we actually, again, the school I went to was just awesome because it was a transpersonal school. We practiced a lot of these things truly in class, which was so fun. And one thing I did when I was living out in California, you know, the old thing about part of people will call it manifesting, like your parking spaces and things. But the other thing is you could be driving around a parking lot and it's not even necessarily intently like, I'm trying to manifest my parking spot. It's just being able to get curious, and all of a sudden you may have a picture of like, oh, over in the third row in between these two vehicles, there's a spot, right? And so you drive over to the third row and there it is, you've got a spot. I know for me, one thing I've continued to play around with is when I'm driving. Of course, you know, here we're all, what they talk about in driving school, you know, you need to be a defensive driver. But one thing to have fun with is in the different states, there are different defensive and or aggressive type of drivers. And I don't care what state you live in. Some you may find it's much more at flow. It's not a big deal. And other times it feels more aggressive. But when you start to really tap into that intuition, you can really figure out who may be unsafe to kind of like be around when you're driving, and others where it's just like, oh, there's just ease and flow. I don't know how many times I've been driving down the highway in various states as I continue to practice this and stay open to the information that I receive, that I've avoided accidents because someone hasn't turned on their signal. They've just, you know, like jerked their car over into the lane I was in or the lane I was going to go in, almost causing another car to be in an accident. Things like that. And I get we have our like blind spots in our cars, but being able to tap into that intuition and stay in the moment can be really helpful. Or like, oh, I think I need to get off on this exit. And you're like, I don't know why I need to get off on this exit or why I'm being told I ought to get off on this exit. And so you follow that hunch and you take that exit only to find out, later on in the news, there was like a huge accident that took hours or shut down the highway. Again, this is not using your GPS systems and all that stuff that can notify you of these things. It's those intuitive hits. It may be those things where I love calling that ethereal thread, right? You're thinking of somebody, you're like, yeah, I need to actually, call them up because I've been wondering how they're doing. And the next thing you're getting a text from them or a phone call from them because they just followed that. It's all these beautiful things that you can use in your professional life and your personal life. But it goes back to you taking time for yourself, truly doing that contemplative work, doing that mindfulness work so that you can clear out old stuff that you've literally outgrown, those old inner stories that no longer work for you, so that you can stay this open channel to receive more of those intuitive hits, more of those intuitive messages, visions, how you can take your business from this thing to the next even bigger thing. Or maybe you're building your visibility because, man, you are a change maker. You have big dreams for where you're going professionally. And the next thing you know, you get this hit that says, I want to reach out to this podcast host. I want to reach out to this person. Maybe we can do some collaboration. And you take that leap of faith and you do it, and things just flow with ease. And all of a sudden you're out there more in the world. People are finding you easier. You're working in a beautiful collaborative relationship with this other person, and both sets of things that you offer, the services that you offer, really make a difference for so many other people in the world. That to me is the soul work. That to me is you leading from a soul place versus allowing the fears, the people pleasing, the perfectionism, the constricted, the imposter syndrome. Those are all fear-driven places. And when you release those old beliefs, those old behaviors, those old thoughts, you open up a whole different way of being and live much more in alignment with what works for you. For all my moms out there, I want you to, again, another action step for you. I want you to think back of the times when you, again, had maybe an intuitive hit, an inner knowing about something maybe going on. And so you've prevented your child from doing a certain activity. And again, it saved them. For people who have survived like near-death experiences, they often have stated after the fact of like, wow, I was planning on getting on that train, but I didn't. I was scheduled to get on that plane and fly over to such and such a place, but I didn't. I was running late. It didn't happen. All of those things because then the train got derailed, the plane crashed. Different big things like that is also that intuitive stuff that happens. And you may not have this, quote, logical understanding of it, and that's okay. Think about the times as you've been leading people. How many times have you just like, oh, I think so-and-so may need this. And all of a sudden, I don't know, it's like a training on a certain software platform, or they could use a different kind of calendar or something or other that would help them out. And it's not because they asked. It's not because maybe you even talked about it. You just had this feeling that somehow they may need this. And so you go over and you say, hey, so-and-so, I just was thinking, or I had this thought, maybe this would be beneficial to you. And so I just thought I would ask if, you're open to getting this or having this or whatever. And they're like, oh my gosh, absolutely. That is intuition. I'm going to challenge you for this week. I want you to get really curious of possible times in the past where you've been really open to receiving your intuitive hits and you didn't allow fear to block you, and what happened as the result of you following that intuition. Then I want you to stay open this week to, if I get a vision, if I hear a voice, just paying attention to it, noticing it. Doesn't mean you have to act on it unless you really want to. That's totally up to you. If you're saying, but I'm not having anything, just keep staying in the quiet. Stay open to receiving what may happen. Because again, so often our intuition is drowned out, pushed down, dismissed really early on, and it's not encouraged to be built upon, that it's possible that we could really live more intuitively and connected. All right, ladies, I hope this was helpful, and I will chat with you next week. To sign up for my new workshop, 3 Ways Being a Good Girl Holds You Back Professionally in Your Business or Your Career, head over to NicoleBurgessCoaching.com/goodgirlways.